It's really interesting that we almost gloss over those moments of, wow, I was just felt like I was cocooned or enveloped by love, cocooned by peace. It's interesting that the mind remembers all the other stuff, not that, and only momentarily points at that. But it's almost like, yes, that happened, but mostly I was feeling blah 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 blah. And I hear this often. That's why one has to ask specifically. Otherwise, you listen to a person and you think, wow, Jesus, is it that bad all the time? So continuously you experience this struggle. And no, it's not continuous. The mind has just cut out the parts that are sort of a little bit of an annoyance to have in there, because they imply that there's something more to this. They imply that there's access to something that I don't readily have on a consistent basis, but it is there, it exists. And this is somewhat annoying, because amidst all of this struggle, this tension, this pressure, there exists this freedom. And it just meets me. Naturally, it wants to meet me. It just pops up in my experience, and I feel totally enveloped, totally held, cared for. And sometimes perhaps the feeling of I'm completely okay. Everything that I'm doing is okay. I'm completely held, completely supported. Feelings that we almost never have in our life. Not so vividly, not when there's nobody around. And yet they're accessible inside. And you're starting to get more of a familiarity with those things. I'm not talking about continuously you've got to experience that in every session. It doesn't work like that. It's not linear. But you are becoming familiar with the presence of such states. They're glimpsing in, popping out. It's momentarily there, then they drift away again. You reach for them, they won't stay with you, then they drift away again. But as you practice, this invitation begins to expand, and you have more possibilities, more opportunities for those experiences to meet you and to come and support you. So this is why it's important to cultivate patience and perseverance. They're the two just essential qualities to develop. Patience and perseverance. Because without that you'll never see. If you never did the hour session, you would never have seen what you're describing to me. You'd never have seen this or experienced this feeling of being enveloped in love, being held or entering a space of complete stillness where there's just pervasive peace. Even if it's just for a few moments, you would never have glimpsed that. So it's really important to cultivate patience and perseverance, the ability to continue with the practice, regardless of how uncomfortable it may appear, how uncomfortable it is, because one day you'll do it and it just won't be uncomfortable, but you wouldn't know if you didn't persevere. I'll share something with you just for interest's sake, perhaps, just given what you've said. And please don't hear this as I need to do that much, or I need to, when am I going to be able to sit for that long? Or, please don't hear it that way. I'm simply describing something that may be relevant to what you're struggling with. So on Sunday, I decided to sit for longer, and I have been feeling, in any case, since the lockdown, I want to sit for longer periods at a time, and delve a little bit deeper into what's happening, what I'm experiencing, and what's happening around me. And so, one of the things that I said to you this morning that I'm really very clear about at the moment is sitting still. Absolutely still, not moving, not shifting, not changing position, just sitting still. So I made a commitment on Sunday, I'm going to sit still for a few hours and not move a muscle, sit absolutely still and meditate. So I sat for about 3.5 to 4 hours, and I didn't move at all. But that meditation took me through numerous phases of what you're describing. Phases of, at one point, complete nausea. I wanted to vomit all over the deck. I was sitting outside. It was really early in the morning, it's 4:30, 4:45. So there was nobody around for that whole time, really. My house only woke up at about 9. I wanted to vomit. Then as I was wanting to vomit, I couldn't stop it. I thought, I'm just going to vomit all over the deck. And then it didn't come. Then I became really lightheaded, like I was about to pass out, that feeling of when you're dehydrated and you haven't eaten and you're just about to pass out. And this feeling was there, the vomiting was there, and then there was pain, significant pain in my right leg. It was like a toothache. It just kept gnawing at me. And all the while, I'm sitting in this, drifting between the incredibly strong desire to stop, to just stop. This is enough. I've done enough. Just stop. This is long enough. This is too sore. This is uncomfortable. Drifting between that and a place where I'm there in all of that, and there was no will to continue. I couldn't access will. I could always access will in meditation, will, that sort of that feeling that can drive one to continue to practice. You know, that the sort of the impulse inside is, I'm staying, and that's that. I couldn't even access that. That was just like ice. It just slipped every time I even looked for it. It wasn't there. So there was this contrast of really wanting to give up, wanting to stop, and staying, but not knowing how I'm staying. And then I started to see, it was like a veil that parted, that there's a drifting between two aspects. I won't say dimensions. I don't know if dimension would be the right word for it. But the aspect of duality and non-duality. Aspect of the contrast of things and the non-contrast of things. The splitting, the separating into matter and the non-matter. And in that space, drifting between the two, my ears opened. Just like somebody taking plugs out of my ears. And I could hear everything. Could hear everything in the forest, every single sound. But I could both hear the sound and be the sound at the same time. So there was no distinction between the listener and the sound itself. There was just some kind of combination of that, almost drifting again between the listener, being the listener and being the sound, and then being neither and being both. And this just continued. It was an incredibly strange and interesting and I wouldn't say comforting necessarily. It was just a blissful state. It was just there. It wasn't exciting or exhilarating or insightful. It was just this space. And as I drifted into duality, there would be the ache, the significant ache. There would be the nausea, there'd be the near passing out. And then as I drifted into non-duality, there would just be all of that and no response to it, no concern with it whatsoever. You'll have moments, certainly, where you touch on this, touch on the fact that there's this significant discomfort. There's this emotion, there's this continuous emotion that always comes up when you practice. There's this continuous pain or ache that always comes up, or you're always restless, always needing to move, and can never find the right position to sit in. This is completely natural, normal, common. There have been many such experiences for me. I call this patience and perseverance the essential characteristics to develop, or essential qualities to develop, because without them, you'll never see beyond the reality that thought is producing for you. You'll never see beyond reality itself. That's why we've got that in the title today, distinguishing thought, reality, and truth. What is thought? Well, you're already fairly clear about thought. Thought is the encumbrance, the collected interpretation of what is. It's the collected or accumulated defining definition of existence, of matter, of form, of formlessness, of non-matter. It's the collective ideas that are presented as a structure, and that structure is thought. It's a way in which we can assimilate something beyond experience of it, direct experience of it. Mostly we don't assimilate it via experience and then thought. We assimilate things via thought. And then we think the thought is equal to the experience. But imagine if this was the first time you heard anything the likes of what I just described, and you considered that you could understand that because of the way I described it. I know I didn't describe it very eloquently, but imagine if you could hear that and say, ah, yes, I get it. I get what you're talking about. I've read about non-duality and duality, and I understand the difference, and that there's sort of an I and a no I, and you can drift between. Imagine that you try to assimilate it that way. You're assimilating thought. You're accumulating thought. And that thought is actually becoming an encumbrance to your direct experience of aliveness, your intimate relationship with life. The encumbrance is nowhere near the thing that is being described. It's the description, and the description is not the thing. There's in Buddhism a beautiful saying that simply goes, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. Wow, okay, that initially you think maybe that's a stupid saying. But consider, the finger pointing to the moon, the description of anything is not what's being described. It's the description, which is an entirely different thing altogether. You were not there sitting in this body experiencing what I'm describing. You're listening to the description. And as you listen to the description, you compare it to things that you've heard and read and learnt about before, things that are already conditioned in your mind. You question whether there is such a thing, whether I was just dehydrated and tired and a little bit drifting into a type of psychosis and out. And you would question that. You would wonder if everything in me is intact. But you would have no answer in the end, because you'd be questioning via a vehicle that doesn't give you anything real. It just gives you the second-hand value, the second-hand interpretation, the second-hand deduction. It doesn't give you anything real. The real is in the vehicle that is this being that you are, this aliveness, this dynamic, vital expression of life. That's the only way you could really know. And then you might ask, so what is reality then, if I'm always looking through this veil of accumulated thought? You've heard me talk about the lens before. The lens through which I view the world is the sum total of my conditioning, the knowledge gained from past experiences and memory. In other words, the interpretation of events and the retention of that interpretation and the pre-existing accumulation of conditioning that I received from my parents and my environment very early on in life. That's the lens through which I view everything around me. So what I see is reality, but reality then is this side of the lens. So one might then readily ask, what is on the other side of the lens? If the glasses are foggy, you see reality, which is a foggy impression of form, of movement, of relationship, of interaction. You see a foggy impression of all of those things. You say, this is reality. Reality is foggy. Reality is harsh. Reality is violent. Reality is empty, dismal, despairing. Reality is pointless, meaningless. Because you're looking through a lens that is the sum total of the accumulated psyche. Now, would you not ask then, if you see that this is how you look at everything, would you not be inquisitive interested, curious about what exists on the other side of the lens. If the lens were able to be completely clear. And you cannot answer that question. Please don't jump to any conclusion that you have, again, read about or heard about, that it's impossible to be free of conditioning, it's impossible to clear the lens. Please don't do that, because this is not anything that you know. We're asking a question, we're exploring it. You cannot know that intellectually. There's no way. Nobody can offer you any conclusion, any substantial insight. The only one that can do that is you. Is in really looking at what is the nature of conditioning, what is the nature of the accumulated psyche, what is the nature of this lens. Perhaps what is on the other side of the lens is very different to the reality that I see through the lens. And if there is no lens, then perhaps I can consider that what's there then is truth. Irrespective of lens, there's something that just is. And no matter who is looking, if they have cleaned the lens, if the lens is clear, they'll see the same truth. The only difference will be in how they formulate that. In other words, how they express that to the people around them, if they choose to do so. This is obviously why some people remain silent. You question, why would you remain silent? Why would you not say anything? Why wouldn't you talk to people? If you've had all these deep experiences and you understand reality and truth, why would you not talk? Well, quite obviously, because they realize that the moment they give word to something, an expression to something, it's no longer what they're experiencing. It's no longer truth. It's already been tainted by the word and the association that we have with the word. So it becomes very difficult to put into words the nature of the experience, the nature of the direct, intimate relationship. And we search for words that we've accumulated that could best point at, describe, prompt a deeper inquiry, not an explanation, but a deeper inquiry in the listener. And those words are the sum total of whatever has been accumulated. The words that I tend to accumulate to give expression to what I feel, what I see, what I discover, is different to the words that somebody who has perhaps studied philosophy, or somebody who has studied law, or someone who has never studied. The words that they draw on are very different. And so sometimes when we listen to different teachers, we say, why are they saying that? Why? This person says this, uses these words, and that person uses those words. This person comes from, you can see they have got a religious background. And this person comes from a more scientific background. They use different words. But if you listen carefully, if you have an appreciation of, if you've had a glimpse of truth, an experiential glimpse, you'll hear the words, you'll feel the words, and you'll know this person has had an experience, a very valuable experience, very deep or rich experience, and they're trying to find the words to communicate this. And then it also becomes easier to hear when someone is talking and they don't know what they're talking about. It becomes quite straightforward to hear that. They're borrowing words, and the words are empty. The words don't carry any clarity, any experiential truth. You see, the words that arise out of the stillness that is truth, they carry a different weight when you hear them. They sit inside you. They rest, when you hear them, they rest somewhere inside. And it's though you can't get rid of them. They don't just go away. They sit there. And they seem to germinate. They seem to to become richer, to carry some sort of weight. And something in us resonates with that. Something familiar, something that knows preconception, precognitively, knows this to be true. Of course, there's a lot of corruption around this. I can say, I know this to be true, when I really want it to be true. Then the mind will also say, I just know it to be true. I know this is so, because I want to believe this. I'm invested in this. My family is invested in this. My friends are invested in this to be true. So I don't want this truth to be shattered. I won't hear anything that is potentially going to shatter what I want to believe. Truth doesn't work like that. You will have no inclination to cling on to truth, to try to hold it up to others, to defend it, to protect it. It doesn't require anything like that. Take the lens away and it just stands there in front of you. It's not going anywhere. It's all around you. It is you. And there's nothing there that needs an I, a mind, to defend it. The mind will only ever defend its own creation. It forms its own interpretation, and it does so because it's reacting to something. We react to discomfort, to insecurity, to worthlessness, to uncertainty, to panic, to anxiety. We react to it and we create an interpretation of events, or an interpretation of what we see around us, what is happening around us. And that interpretation serves as a form of temporary certainty, just as we see happening today in the world around us. This serves as a temporary sense of certainty. It's flimsy and it is a complete illusion. But the mind is looking for something to hold on to, so it comes to a conclusion and says, this is what's happening. And it holds on to that, and if something or somebody threatens that interpretation, that belief, because there's tension in it, as you can see. There's a tightening, a contraction in the body. There's a closing down around the interpretation, the belief, because this is already a reaction to something, a reaction to a feeling of discomfort, a feeling of disturbance. So already there's a contraction, and now I have to defend that contraction. My own creation, this mind's own creation, nothing to do with truth. And I have to defend it because, in a way, my life depends on it. My life, the way that I see it, the way that I've lived it, the way that I want to go on living it, depends on it. It depends on this belief. Because if the belief is shattered, then the feeling of panic, pointlessness, meaninglessness, bubbles to the surface very rapidly. And I don't know what to do with that. That is overwhelming. And it's in all of us. It's not something that is preferential to certain people. Of course, there are many people perhaps who don't feel that directly. They're not experiencing it right now. There are so many tasks and activities that the mind is engaged in that it doesn't recognize this. It makes it up as it goes. It's constantly creating meaning in everything that we do. Some intellectual meaning, some outcome, some conclusions. And yet, deep down inside, we're running as fast as we can to get away from this deep sense of despair, of depression, of loneliness, of meaninglessness. Now this is only depressing and dark and negative sounding when one is not willing to look at it, because it's there anyway and it's governing our behaviors. It's governing how we interact with life. It's governing all our relationships, what we seek in relationship, what we demand from our partner and from the people around us, what we have to have at work, the things that we have to accumulate. It's governing all of that. So it's there anyway. The agony really is in not looking at it, not acknowledging it, not asking the question, what is happening in here? Why the need for belief? Why the constant need for an artificial certainty? Sometimes people say, I was happy before all of this happened. Let's say a big disturbance like the one we're experiencing at the moment. I just wish things can just get back to normal. I wish we could just get through this and things can just be back to normal. Because I was really happy before all this chaos started. Well, if you were really happy before all the chaos started, what would be any different now? You'd still be happy. If the happiness was really there, then you'd still be happy, even though the chaos is all around you. But if your happiness was only circumstantial, then it means that the happiness was totally dependent on things looking a certain way, things appearing to you in a certain way, things interacting with you in a certain way. And the moment there's change, which is totally inevitable, you cannot tolerate it. Happiness goes out the window. It was never actually there. It was never real. Happiness that is discovered from within, and that doesn't rely on the environment looking a certain way. It doesn't rely on people treating you in a particular way. It doesn't rely on having certain things. Never experiencing any discomfort. It doesn't rely on anything that is form. This is something that has no form. It's the formlessness that you are. It's when there's disentanglement from the addiction to the content of thought, then there can be peace, there can be fulfillment, a type of happiness or joy that doesn't have an opposite. It's not a dualistic experience then. It just is. It's a truth, an inherent nature. It's not something that the mind has acquired, that it has achieved, finally achieved. It's sat long enough, done enough self-flagellation, read enough books, accumulated enough knowledge, and now finally it's going to accumulate happiness. Finally it's going to accumulate inner peace, because it's taken the interpretations of the various teachings and it's formulated its own magnificent conclusion, magnificent culmination of philosophy. And now it's finally achieved happiness. It doesn't work like that. But this is a way that we search for such things. We search through the intellect, through memory, through the past, through time. We're going to get there one day. The thought that tomorrow is going to be when we get the answer, when we enter this realm of inner stillness or fulfillment. And we constantly introduce time via the avenue of thought. Keep introducing, keep introducing. The more time we introduce, the more we are drawn away from what is real, what is actual. The more we obscure what is actual, what is real. We have very little possibility of entering truth, of discovering truth then, because we're so inundated with and enamored with our interpretations, our conclusions.